Decades ago, I started growing food in my front and backyard, and I realized that my mission in life is to inspire and empower others to grow their own nutrient-dense, healthy organic food. Because of this, a lot of people have come to me with their gardening questions over the years, and that got me thinking, what if we put together a community that would help budding gardeners blossom? So I finally made the idea a reality with my Urban Farm U member program. Each month, your membership includes 3 live online events, a monthly class, a chit-chat with an expert, and a monthly coaching session, plus access to the experts on our member page and a significant discount on our signature courses. I'm deeply committed to transforming our global food system, and I do this by empowering you to grow your own food. The Urban Farm membership program is a simple way to get going. Please join me in transforming your food system today. To learn more, go to urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444. That's urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444.
You're listening to the Urban Farm Podcast, your partner in the Grow Your Own Food revolution. Whether you've just been introduced to urban farming or you're a lifelong advocate, we're sure you'll leave feeling more informed, equipped, and empowered to dig deeper into the soil of your local food economy. With you every step of the way, here's your host, Greg Peterson.
Today on the Urban Farm Podcast, we have David A. Bainbridge to talk about his experience with gardening with less water. David grew up in a small town working in the family toy factory. Now that's going to be an interesting story, David. Enjoying the rivers, mountains, and sage-covered hills that surrounded the factory. After earning his degree in earth sciences at UC San Diego, he headed to UC Davis to complete his master's in ecology in the multidisciplinary Eco-Grad Program. He started a company doing environmental impact analysis, then transitioned to a solar research and design firm where he worked on community design, passive solar heating and cooling, building codes, and solar rights. He eventually established the Passive Solar Institute to continue his research, education, and consulting on solar design and energy conservation. David returned to academia and worked on desert restoration at UC Riverside and San Diego State University, where his current research involves micro-irrigation, cool pool design, and true cost accounting. David also recently published a book called Gardening with Less Water that was published by Story Publishing. Welcome to the show today, David.
Delighted to be with you.
Well, thank you so much. And oh my gosh, as I was reading your bio, there are so many things I want to ask you. So I just shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at now?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. The story of my career has been like many careers, with many ups and downs and sideways trails, but it's all been concerned about the issues of sustainability. Mm-hmm. And it's really guided all the work I've done, not just sustainability of water, but energy, community, culture, education, and all the things that go with it. Mm-hmm. And as you noted, I grew up in a small town in northeastern Washington that was dry sagebrush country. And when my parents retired, they moved to a small farm in Colorado near Mesa Verde National Park. And on that degraded dry land, I really started work on how to manage and restore dry lands back in the 1970s.
Right.
And I found that quite fascinating and interesting. There had not been a great deal of work done on drylands restoration, and it just suited what I had learned in my earth sciences and ecology program, mm-hmm. and had some positive results early on their farm, and that sort of kept me going and got me back into the university system. When I applied for a job as a manager of a nature reserve at the University of California, Riverside. And although I didn't get selected for that, I did get picked from that interview to work for the Drylands Research Institute at the University of California, Riverside,
nice.
Where the goal was the sustainable management of drylands and deserts around the world. And that proved to be the real lodestone as we surveyed literature around the world, interviewed farmers, and brought in and interviewed researchers from all over the world, and got a chance to see what they were doing and what they knew. One of the most interesting things to me always is how traditional societies manage resources. And these scientists often said, well, those are traditional practices, and we don't study that because we only get money if we study high-yield, intensive agriculture.
Right.
But they did share what they knew, and that really got me going. We were lucky enough to be asked by the California Department of Transportation to look at their practices for landscaping on highways and freeways in the desert, where they'd had a notable lack of success for 25 years. They'd spent millions of dollars on plants that died, and they finally said, hey, maybe we should ask somebody to take a look at this.
Right.
And maybe we can't do things the way we do out on the coast. So that's how we really got started, and they were gracious enough to fund us for many years and supported a lot of my early research on irrigation. So that got me into 30 years of work on irrigation and desert restoration, and the irrigation ideas that we learned about way back in the 1980s really took about 30 years to fully evaluate and test. And one of the most important steps was a book that my boss brought back from China, an agricultural textbook about 2,000 years old.
Oh, my gosh.
Only a few fragments have survived, unfortunately, but one of them had to do with buried clay pot irrigation. And I was very lucky to have another professor at UC Riverside who had done his thesis on archaic China, so he could translate the measurements for me. And I rushed out to the student garden at UC Riverside and planted my first clay pot irrigation project, and worked so well, and it's been a consistent success ever since.
Nice. Wow. Okay, cool. So I have, like I said, I have a bunch of questions for you. So tell me about your master's in ecology in multidisciplinary Eco-Grad Program. What is that?
Well, it was a wonderful program, and I think it still exists. It's actually called the Eco-Grad Program, and you can take classes from allied professors in many different departments. So you're not restricted to just one discipline. You can take classes across campus, and that really suited me since I'm interested in just about everything. Yeah. And it really helped shape my approach to work after that.
Perfect. So go ahead.
Yeah, we just had a very interesting group of professors at the time, very talented set, and very inspirational as well. One of my profs was one of the Tuskegee Airmen.
Oh, wow.
And a couple of really noted scientists who've sort of helped set the stage for restoration work. So it was a really great time.
Nice.
And a chance to interact with other students from really different backgrounds as well.
Right.
And that's how I ended up doing my work on solar design. I really was fascinated by the micrometeorology and microclimate, and had spent a lot of time working on that. And one of the other grad students started a solar design firm, and he said, well, I need somebody who understands microclimate. So I was able to get my first job working for him, really, doing work on passive solar design.
Nice. And
research on climatology.
So you use the word microclimate, just so that everybody knows. Could you define that?
Sure. Microclimate is really just looking at the smallest scale of climate rather than the big scale. So if you look in the weather paper, it might say the average temperature for Phoenix was 57 degrees. But if you looked around the different neighborhoods, from a cold drainage area, it might be 30 degrees, and from a protected spot, it might be 75 degrees.
Right.
And it's really a very fascinating part of understanding ecosystems is how temperatures shape the plants you see, and how animals survive, and how houses perform. It's really a micro-scale issue. And there's a wonderful book, which is a little confusing at times because of awkward translation, called The Climate Near the Ground, which really covers a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the advisors for our company, solar company, was an emeritus professor, Todd Neubauer, who'd worked on microclimate and solar houses for almost 40 years and really done some inspirational work that still remains a little known and unfortunately not as well appreciated as it should be.
Yeah.
So that was really great. I mean, there were talented people there who knew lots of things, but nobody was asking them what they knew until we came around, and it really worked out well.
Nice. So you mentioned a few moments ago something called traditional practices. Say a little bit more about that. What is that?
Yeah, traditional practices are what have evolved around the world as all the different people who were facing the same challenges of water and food and shelter and energy come up with their own solutions that fit their local environment. And they're called traditional because they usually have developed without a scientific background and without reports. And many times they've been used for thousands of years, so they're very highly evolved. And one of the great things I learned is that you really have to respect these people because they're intelligent. They're outside looking at what's happening every day, and they often know a lot more than the scientists who are going out to study these things because they haven't spent as much time looking at them.
Yeah.
And really a great deal can be learned from just looking at those. And as with the scientists who came into the Drylands Research Institute, they often appreciated that, but they just couldn't get funding to study traditional practices.
Right.
And fortunately, I can say that's changed in the last 10 years. There's finally been a recognition that many of the things that people knew and do are very sophisticated and smart, even though they haven't been developed through a university or extension service.
Yeah. Like looking into this notion of permaculture, maybe?
Absolutely. Permaculture and agroforestry.
Yeah.
Many of the complex practices are incredibly efficient and very productive, but they're not well suited to somebody with a tractor or a center pivot irrigation system. So we don't see them studied as much as we should.
Yeah. So why did you get involved in research on the super efficient irrigation systems?
Well, one of the challenges that we faced working for the Department of Transportation on our first project was we were working about 100 miles from home out in the desert. It gets 3 inches of water a year, and there are no water sources. So every bit of water we had for our plantings had to be carried out by truck, and that made it extremely expensive water. So every drop saved really made a big difference. So our goal became to use as little water as possible to keep plants alive until eventually it would rain. And we found that it could be very, very low quantities of water. As much as some people might water in a day, might last for months or even for a year if it was done right.
It was done right, yeah. So you mentioned the buried clay pots, or what I know them to be as Ollas. That's OLLA. Can you speak more about them and how they work? And
Sure. Ollas are really what got me started on super efficient irrigation from that Chinese textbook. And it's not only used in China, but other places in the world as well. One of our visitors to the Drylands Research Institute had put his children through school in the United States by growing melons on buried clay pots or Ollas in Mexico. So it's been around and it's used, but it hadn't been written up very much. So you put the sealed or a buried clay pot in the soil, fill it with water, and the water moves through the capillary pores in the clay at a very slow rate. Just kind of seeps out. If you've ever wetted a red clay pot, you can see it turns a little darker color when it gets wet. And the more water the plants use, the drier it gets outside, so water flows through the clay a little bit faster. So it's a self-regulating system without any controls. It's just really a clay pot that's been buried.
Well, they have to be particular kind of clay pots, yes?
Well, they have to be porous. That's the main thing. And the traditional red clay pots that are used in nurseries with a hole in the bottom have the right porosity, so all you have to do is put a rubber stopper or a dab of epoxy in the hole, and you can use those. Oh. And in the last couple of years, we've had a number of companies start making Oyas for irrigation in recognition of how efficient they are.
Right.
The two really big companies are Deep Springs Oyas, Dripping Springs Oyas, rather, and Grow Oya, which surprisingly is a Canadian firm, but has done very well in getting Oyas out into the market. And I just checked recently and saw that even Home Depot now is selling Oyas. So they may not carry them in all the stores, but they can be ordered through their online system.
Interesting. Wow. So you've put a lot of this together in a book called Gardening with Less Water. And what are some of the other innovative systems that you describe in your book?
Yeah, there's a number of them, and they're all worth consideration. For many people, the best solution is a combination of several of these different systems. So one that's very similar to Oyas is called porous capsules. And these are just sealed pottery, tubes, pipes, or bottles that are filled with water through a system connected to a pipe system.
Oh, interesting.
And these have been used particularly in Brazil. So with the Rio Olympics on, might be a chance to look at what's been done with porous capsules. And those haven't been very well known because most of the literature was in Portuguese.
Oh, interesting.
And not too widely translated. Another one is a deep pipe, which is really just a vertically placed pipe without a bottom. So you can pour water into it and it goes deep into the root zone with very little evaporation.
Right.
And on our desert projects, that turned out to be the most common solution because it's very inexpensive. It works quite well. Can be combined with drip systems where a drip emitter goes into the pipe. And you can pull the pipes and reuse them over and over again for many years. So very effective system. And in the last couple of years, a company called Deep Drip now sells commercial deep pipes. And those can be found at Home Depot as well.
Yeah, those are the ones that you pound in the ground, right?
Well, they say you can pound it in the ground, but in our areas, you'd never pound it into the ground. You've got to dig a hole to put the deep pipes in.
Yeah, I think
and the deep pipes would typically be 12 to 18 inches deep. And we drill a few holes down one side in case the roots on the plants we're planting don't go all the way to the bottom of the pipe when we start.
Yeah. Now, is that for larger plants like trees and shrubs?
Very good for starting trees and shrubs, and if you use several of them, it could work for to increase the root spread as the plants get older. People have suggested they'd like to convert an existing surface irrigation system to deep pipes for trees, but it's challenging to do it because the tree is really adapted to surface irrigation if it's done that, and it won't find the deep pipes very quickly. So it can be done, but it has to be done with care. You don't want to kill any larger trees. For a much more efficient system than deep pipes, we started looking at Wick Systems, and these use a piece of fabric or a piece of rope that will wick water along it. And they can be used in several configurations, depending on the water need. The water can flow up through the wick, which is the most efficient way to do it, and it flows up by capillary action just as the water goes through the pipes. And those can be the most efficient systems of all. They're used occasionally for African violets, which are very sensitive to getting water on their leaves.
Oh, right.
The other type of wicks could be a gravity-fed wick, where the wick is just attached to a small pipe at the bottom of a big reservoir, and the water runs down the wick and can go quite deep into the soil.
Those are like wicking.
With very little.
Aren't those like wicking beds? Like wicking beds, right?
No, these are doing it rather than using a blanket or fabric. These are just an individual wick, so it's a little more specific.
And apparently they work fairly well.
They work very well, but sometimes the water movement is not quite fast enough for a really rapidly growing plant like a pumpkin or squash, better adapted for things that don't use as much water, or for young seedlings when you're just getting them started.
Yeah. How efficient are these systems, and can they be used on a widespread basis, do you think?
Yeah, in terms of efficiency, it's one of the most challenging things to talk about with irrigation systems in general, since there are so many factors involved, and most of them are microclimate issues of how the wind approaches the plants and how the soil evaporation takes place, and when the water is put on. But what we found and what we can say with confidence is the buried clay pot systems can be up to 10 times better than surface irrigation.
Oh, wow.
And better than drip systems. Not a huge difference if a drip system is managed really well, but more efficient and much more reliable. We actually started out using drip systems, but the animals chewed them up. They got plugged by insects, they got plugged by salt, they got plugged by algae, and they just didn't work. So after our first trials, we completely shifted away from drip.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it's something that's labor intensive.
Yeah, it's management intensive, I think.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
You have to have really clean water, and you have to stay on top of it at all times. So these traditional systems are meant for people who don't have time to do that. The beauty of the clay pots, you might only have to fill it once a week. And because the water is so concentrated, you almost eliminate weeds, and that's where they really pay off, is reducing weeds. Yeah,
that's what I was going to ask you next, because you talk about in your book about the incredible reduction of weed growth. And so
right, on one project we had 200 pounds per acre with efficient systems and 8 tons with flood irrigation.
Of course. Well, and then at the same time, those weeds are taking up all the nutrients, and then you're throwing it away, right?
They're eating your nutrients and your water, and it's great if you can avoid that.
Yeah.
Another system I haven't mentioned is readily available in stores, and it can be a little more efficient than standard irrigation, although it's not as good as these super efficient systems. And that's what's known as leaky pipe or soaker hose, usually made out of recycled rubber, but now there are some that are being made out of polyurethane as well. And they can be very efficient, and they're just very simple to do for row crops, like a row of onions or a row of garlic. So I sometimes use those as well. And they can be done with just gravity pressure if you buy special versions of leaky pipe, which work at very low pressure.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, do you find that the pressure at the beginning of that system, a leaky pipe system, is different than at the end?
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges of doing it well. The manufacturing is not particularly consistent, and the pressure tends to be a little higher at the start of the pipe, so you don't want to have very long runs. It's better to have a fairly long header to split the porous hose up or the leaky pipe into smaller sections, so it's more consistent.
Yeah.
Oh, and they also have to be, they work better if you flush them at the end of the year to get some of the salt and debris out of the inside.
Right.
And some places they'll crank up the pressure on them so they pop off anything that's sort of built up on the outside of the pipe as well.
Oh, yeah, perfect. So our friend Scott Murray over in Vista, California, I just recently found out that both you and I know him. He uses drip tape. What's your feelings about drip tape systems?
Yeah, they can work really well, but again, he's doing it as a career, so he's out there every day making sure things are working. And that's the only real drawback to the drip systems, is they're really management intensive.
Yeah.
Works great for commercial farms and even for small farms and gardens if you're around to take care of them.
To manage them, yeah. Perfect.
And for our projects where we started, when you're 100 miles from home and you get there every 2 or 3 weeks, drip systems just didn't work.
Yeah, I can completely get that.
Yeah, one of the other things that we like to stress is the use of rainwater. And if you have super efficient systems, then to be able to do it at low pressure with very little use of water means you can stretch out your rainwater as far as possible for your garden production.
Yeah. Perfect. So why did you decide to write this book, and who's it intended for?
Well, my current book, Gardening with Less Water, is for everybody, and particularly for home gardeners and small farmers, people who have some tomatoes in a container on their porch. Mm-hmm. Really just to make it easier for them to get things to grow and to use less water. And in 2007, I wrote a big handbook on desert restoration.
Oh.
And it's really much more complete, but at $100 for the hardback, not many people are going to find it affordable or useful. So with Gardening with Less Water, I looked for a company that delivers a really nice book at a reasonable price.
Yeah. I do love stories. I do love stories, books, and you know, they've got great titles, and so congratulations on that. They're a great publisher.
Yeah, they were really nice to work with, and really helped doing wonderful illustrations and photographs to make it as easy to understand as possible. Yeah. And the best place to get it probably is on Amazon. Or ask your local bookstore to bring it in for you.
Perfect. Can you suggest any other web resources that will help our listeners better understand these systems?
Sure. One of the most useful ones is just my website, which has technical bulletins and all kinds of papers, not just about irrigation, but also some of the other issues your listeners are interested in. And you can find that just by searching under David A. Bainbridge. It's actually at works.bepress.com/David_A_Bainbridge. Yeah. And there are a couple other David Bainbridge authors, so the David A catches the work I've done instead of what they've done.
Yeah. I just sat down in front of Google, typed in David A. Bainbridge, BAINBRIDGE, and you came up first. So.
Right. And we have a YouTube for people to watch that one of my former students did for me.
Oh, nice.
On how to set up a herb container with oil irrigation for your patio or porch. And this was produced by Seco Rude, one of the great students I had. And it's www.youtube.com/V equals VOIBQVXKSXS. Too much.
Yeah.
So just look for Oya Irrigation and David A. Bainbridge, and it'll probably show up as well.
Perfect. And we'll have that on our show notes page as well.
Excellent.
So I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
Well, one of the failures we had was we were setting up a restoration class for the Society for Ecological Restoration up at Red Rock Canyon State Park. And we'd been working frantically all day getting plants in the ground and ran out of time to put the tree shelters on, which we used, the double-wall plastic tree shelters we found really helped with plants. And when we got back the next morning, almost all the plants had been eaten. And
I saw that challenges. Yeah.
And in the desert, the jackrabbits particularly are a problem. So we got smart, and from then on, we made sure that whatever we planted got tree shelters the same day. And a few weeks later, we saw that the coyote had finally gotten this old jackrabbit. He was probably moving too slow because of all the plants of ours he'd eaten. So really not trying to push the limits, I think, is really helpful in whatever you're doing, whether you're working on the farm or in the garden. When you're tired, wrap things up nicely, put the tools away safely, and go back the next day and get to it. So one of the other lessons we learned in our restoration work, and it came kind of slow to me since I was at the time and a ferociously hard worker, is that people are volunteering, so you don't want to completely wear them out. Is to be nice to your volunteers, give them some nice food, give them some breaks, make sure they stay hydrated, and let them go before they're too tired so they'll come back again another day.
Perfect. And what do you consider your biggest success
The biggest success, I think, is the work I've done on super irrigation, super efficient irrigation.
Mm-hmm.
It really has become very popular and spreading around the world. And if you look on the web now or YouTube, there are programs on deep pipes and oil irrigation in French and Portuguese and other languages around the world, and that really makes me feel good.
Yeah.
The other thing is the little sideline hobby I had working on straw bale construction.
Oh, nice.
It was never anything I got paid to do, but it was of interest to me and was sort of my hobby for about 10 years. And when we did the first straw bale construction book called The Straw Bale House, the publisher thought it might sell 1,400 copies.
Mm-hmm.
And a few years ago, it passed 130,000.
Wow.
So it's had a really big impact on the straw bale movement. And even though I'm not very much involved anymore, it really was a great success and was very satisfying to see.
What was the name of that book?
It's just called The Straw Bale House,
Okay.
with Bill Steen and Athena Steen and David Eisenberg. And it was published by Chelsea Green. And it's still in print and still available. So
Nice.
even though many of the techniques now are outdated, there's 30 or 40 straw bale books that are better, but it still was a very nice introduction to the topic.
Nice. So what drives you?
Well, it's always hard to ask that to any author, but I just feel compelled to do this kind of work, and it's satisfying to me. And I have enough books still to write that I'll have to live another 30 or 40 years
At least.
to get them all done.
Yeah.
And that's just satisfying. When I was teaching, I think the biggest satisfaction was to see the students change in attitudes and change in ability in the time you got to work with them.
Yeah.
And one of the most satisfying things is to hear from them today of what they're doing and the amazing things they've done. So that's a really wonderful thing about having the chance to be a teacher at some time in your life.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. Thank you so much for that. So I'm all about education, and I have to know, is there one book that has been influential for you in this process in your life?
Well, the book that got me to switch from geology to ecology is still an important one, and that's the Sand County Almanac
Oh, yes.
by Aldo Leopold.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still reading that anyone interested in resources or gardens or farming or forestry should read. Really remarkable in insight and thoughts about how things could be managed and what's important in life. And just recently, one of his daughters, Stella Leopold, wrote a little book about life at the shack in Wisconsin, where the Leopold family developed a lot of their environmental restoration techniques.
Uh-huh.
And I'd really encourage people to take a look at that as well. It's just a delightful story of what it was like to grow up in that amazing family.
Wow. It's called Life at the Shack?
It's Lessons from the Shack, I think. It's not in front of me at the moment. But just look up Stella Leopold and it will show up, I think.
Cool.
But it's a delightful book.
Yeah. Perfect. So what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
My final piece of advice would be to get outside and to pay attention to what you see. It's really important in the garden, very important in life, really, to pay attention to what's going on around you. So pull out the earbuds, listen, look, and always fascinated to see the things that are going on around us that we sometimes miss because we're too busy or too stressed. Take some time to sit back and just look and see what's happening.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful.
One of the things I do every day now, which keeps me in San Diego, is a beach walk.
Oh,
And
nice.
we have a local peregrine falcon family that lives in the cliffs, so one of the duties every day is to see what the peregrine falcons are up to, and the osprey and all the shorebirds and the sea mammals that come along the coast. So one of the things that can get you going every day.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your experience with us today, David. It has been a treat getting to chat with you.
Great delight talking with you as well, and encourage your readers or listeners to to take a look at some of these materials, and feel free to let me know what works and doesn't work as they go forward. The book is Gardening with Less Water is a really great place to start, but if you can't afford that, there's some really good materials free online as well.
Perfect. And how can our listeners get a hold of you?
Just take a look at the websites, and it's got a connection so they can contact me by email.
Perfect. We'll have that on our show notes page.
All right. Great.
Perfect.
Thanks so much.
Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast.
My delight. Thanks very much. Great talking to you.
Thank you. Decades ago, I started growing food in my front and backyard, and I realized that my mission in life is to inspire and empower others to grow their own nutrient-dense, healthy organic food. Because of this, a lot of people have come to me with their gardening questions over the years, and that got me thinking, what if we put together a community that would help budding gardeners blossom? So I finally made the idea a reality with my Urban Farm U member program. Each month, your membership includes 3 live online events, a monthly class, a chit-chat with an expert, and a monthly coaching session, plus access to the experts on our member page and a significant discount on our signature courses. I'm deeply committed to transforming our global food system, and I do this by empowering you to grow your own food. The Urban Farm membership program is a simple way to get going. Please join me in transforming your food system today. To learn more, go to urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444. That's urbanfarmmembership.org or text membership to 33444.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen 3 days a week for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.